This is the thing called major depression by DSM. There are so many problems with this that I have actually given a lecture in a mathematics room not far from here with this slide on the screen for 40 minutes. And the reason is that if you want to think about this, the first description I saw was from the director of medicine at the Department of Medicine at the University of Baghdad. I didn't actually meet him because he wrote it in 1056. And it's taken us 1,000 years to discover that this is what depression looked like in Baghdad in the 11th century. And what's the problem? Well, descriptive psychiatry has provided us in modern terms with good metrics. It's highly reliable. I say it's low validity, but in an audience like this, of course, what I really should be saying is it's particulated validity. There are so many validities. David just showed you all sorts of cognitive issues with another rather heterogeneous condition called ADHD. ADHD didn't actually exist when I started in psychiatry. It was invented. We only had hyperactivity, which is not a bad disorder, actually, I'm afraid. It's got a bit muddied. And I'm not sure that major depression has gained by continuous consensual agreements and meetings with various types of individuals since 1960. The biggest mathematical problem is in the weights. So if you look, you'll see that irritability, anger and depressed mood and pervasive anhedonia are three of the items that you can get in, as it were, to be depressed. And they're all given equivalence, both in a latent sense and in a metric sense. And it's true on the other side, in the so-called, what I've called the B symptoms. They're not called A and B. This is just me being naughty, really. And the B symptoms are all these things on the right, and you need 4 of them. And they're all given equivalent weight too, so you can be dead, and that's as an equivalent weight as having a bit of sleep difficulty. Now, of course, the problem is that as we get serious and scientific, this creates a lot of difficulties. In genetics, it's been strikingly interesting how they bypassed this phenotype problem by saying what we need is enough. And so far enough for depression appears to be 100,000 cases and 100,000 controls. They're not cases, actually, they're people with high scores, so it's a sort of QTL analysis. But it's a really difficult issue, and I want to preface what I'm going to say about cognition by saying I don't think we've sorted this out at all. And when we talk about case controls and prospective studies and longitudinal and so forth, as I'm going to, behind it is this little dark shadow. What the heck are we talking about? So this is what we're talking about from here on in, given that background, is taking that categorical and fuzzy diagnosis. If you look at the developmental epidemiology of disease in general, and this is data from Australia, you see that the really important bulge for the emergence of severe mental illnesses in this yellow group here is between 10 and 30. And that is probably not coincidental with the alterations, growth and reorganization of neural systems between that age and that time. The actual data, even correlating those things, is not good because longitudinal repeat measure studies of brain and mind and behavior are not that common. In fact, they don't exist all that well at the moment. But so it's not surprising that gradually we're going to be seeing a lot more science in this area if you're interested in the emergence of depressions and psychoses and personality disorders and drug and alcohol abuse, because these 2 decades matter. It's not to say these don't. You can see David's been talking, I believe, probably in this sort of area where there's another very large chunk of neurodevelopmental disorders. And as you move over time and continuities occur, it's not that other things don't happen. Of course they do. But here is a very big volume of morbidity emerging in the population at large. And this is transcontinental, transcultural. I won't use the word transgender, that would be wrong. And it is very, very much not a kind of Western phenomenon. Cognitive marker theory, not very well elucidated, but most of it is actually based on small numbers and on individuals who've been depressed. The whole of cognitive vulnerability models, very, very important for depression, and Barbara's been working on them extensively for a long time, and me a little bit, is that we have to try and discriminate between what might be cognitive patterns of risk, cognitive patterns of pathophysiology, and cognitive patterns of recurrence, and so forth. I don't think, at the moment, theoretically, there's a justification for believing that all of these positions will show the same characteristics. Because of the ontogenic change in cognition in the first 2 decades and the induced change of being ill, we have a disentangling problem that has not been done sufficiently. So to be able to say what happens to performance between 10 and 20 in the population at large, what are the relative contributions of, say, the tasks that CANTAB measures, I do not think we know sufficient yet about that. So then to ask to map the cognitions of affective disorder on top makes life difficult. There are probably at least 4 contributors to this cognitive marker issue. You've got to deal with heterogeneity, heterochronicity, and some of the sex differences, but 4 contributors seem to be coming through. There's this notion of the generic notion of memory deficits that needs disaggregating. Attentional bias has been extremely well studied, probably the best studied issue in the population in normative childhood and adolescence, as well as in many, many studies in adults, that has led to the current emoticon battery, for example, emoticog. Low inhibition, the inability to inhibit undesirable impulses, appears to be something common and generic but needs further study. And this notion of impaired learning that is coming through in a way that I hadn't thought about myself. Forgive me, I'm not a psychologist, but my psychology colleagues are beginning to say, this might be more important than we think. Cognitive markers, therefore, also have this problem of not being universal. It's no point studying the population as if it's a homogeneous population. We have to try and figure out how to stratify the population in ways to get results that are interpretable. So now, a couple of studies. Population-based, collaboration with Barbara, also recognised Joe Herbert, who helped out with some of the physiological issues, and Peter Jones and Tim, who helped with epidemiology and statistics. So what we did was we took 2 markers that are already well described and well studied in Cambridge. I remember a conversation, Trevor may not remember, we had a conversation, we see each other so little, we managed to meet in Washington DC, though we're only 200 metres apart. And we had breakfast, and I said to him, I want you to explain this probability reversal stuff, and that was about 10 years ago. So he sighed, and I bought him breakfast, and he gave it a go. I think I understood some of it. But what I did know was that we had to stratify the population. And so we took 1,800 individuals and that we had sampled in a population-based cohort study that is ongoing. They were 14 at this age, they're now 25. And we stratified this population by 2 big markers, as they were at the time, gene variant in the serotonin transporter and the history of child maltreatment, both on their own associated on the whole in the literature with the same broad set of cognitions or cognitive vulnerabilities. And we then embedded in this, we conducted a series of computerized cognitive tasks that Barbara designed using CANTAB on around 300 of these individuals. So in terms of sample size, we're trying to get beyond a proof of principle study if we possibly can with a bit of effect. But as always, I wish I'd done it on all 1,200 or even 25,000, but 1,200 would have been better. So what we did was we first of all established a battery. I've only shown you 2, I should have told you what it was. So we took 4 tasks on Barbara's advice. We took paired associate learning for many of the reasons you've already heard about memory. We took the Cambridge gambling task because we had already shown some rather interesting findings in both depression and something else called conduct disorder, which is even messier than depression. It's so messy it makes depression look almost homogeneous. And the issue of risk and impulsivity in decision making seemed pretty important. We had been interested for some time with Barbara in the affective no-go task, and we then also took in this probabilistic reversal task that Trevor had tried to explain to me over breakfast in Washington. And over here, just to start with, is the findings from these 277 embedded inside this population study. And the important issue at this stage is everyone's not mentally ill. These are Cambridge teenagers who are not mentally ill and have hardly ever been mentally ill. Another important issue. So over here, first of all, you can see that, and throughout these slides, you will be able to see that you need both of these markers to really see effects in the population at large. You can't see these effects if you don't take into account the stratification by marker. And then you see, first of all, that anxiety symptoms and depression symptoms are both much greater in the double hit group, to call it that for the moment for shorthand. And when you move to the cognitive tasks, you see exactly the same picture for the effective no-go task, but a striking difference from our patients and our recovered patients is that the results are stronger, the effect size is bigger in those who have trouble when the cue is the neutral word in this task, not the emotional word, not the negative emotional word, not so much. It's there, but not so much. And this was not expected, and partially, I have to say, because some of the older forms of the go-no-go that we used didn't have a neutral condition, so you're not going to find something if you don't test it. So we have a neutral condition, and this was not what we expected. We assumed, from the classical findings in cognitive theory, that we would find an attentional bias and the valence issue would be important, and that valence would be towards negative words, away from positive words. And what we found was positive words, nothing very much happened in the task, and it was towards neutrality. The interpretation was the ambiguity of the cue, the challenge of the cue, was causing a great deal of difficulty in decision making at the time of response. And that was not previously discovered, and we never see it in patients in that way. I'm not quite sure about why, but we do see it in these population-based samples, not effective of age, not effective of sex. The paired associate learning results and the Cambridge gambling task are not here because there were no findings whatsoever in the population at large to discriminate us on these double markers. But the probabilistic reversals showed something, again, slightly unexpected, which is in the first stage of learning. And this population really couldn't do this task. They struggled a great deal to complete what I believe is called stage 1. And that was a really striking and interesting finding that I pondered on, and since we don't have any more data, hence the frustration, we have to think very hard about this. So we had 2 markers in this double hit population of about 400 individuals. So then we plotted whether or not, a year later, these individuals were more likely to develop anxiety or depressive disorders. Note that I've changed the phenotype. For those of eagle-eyed of you still awake, this isn't just about depression, it's about emotional disorders in general for the moment because of this. And there's no rationale for separating these conditions. And we find that the best predictor is not the probabilistic reversal, but this neutral commission errors task, and it predicts with an odds ratio of about 2. It's not bad. I'm not going to say we should win any great prizes for that, but I've never seen prospective data like that before. So in the population at large, using stratification, a single task is the best predictor of where we're at. You can do better than that. I'm not going to take you through the maths much, but you can take the whole of our population science. We melded together 2 population groups, 1,250 and another 660, and we developed a mathematically computational model of what the population looked like based on 2 parameters, which was depression scores and a physiological marker of cortisol. And by using interquartile ranges and then checking our population distributions, again, I could leave this slide up, we could spend an hour talking about the statistics behind this, we won't. You end up in the population at large with 4 samples who, in theory, should have differential cognitive phenotypes if these 4 populations provide differential odds ratio risks for subsequent depressive disorders. So we created these classes, first of all in a discovery sample, which was 666 of these individuals, and then we replicated it in 1,198, and that's the total sample. And the samples were quite interesting because it was robust, despite the fact that some of the physiology measures were differential in time. What was really important for the physiology measure was the very robust nature of early morning waking cortisol as a marker of potential risk. All the other stuff in the psychoendocrine literature is important for pathophysiology. This group gives us huge odds ratios for depression later, particularly in boys, if you're double hit. And then if you look at this double hit, the key issue in the population at large is deficits in overgeneral memory, which were measured only in 666. And if you look at the information processing biases that we'd already shown in the previous sample, you see that individuals in this commission error neutral words are also overrepresented in this high double hit sample in the community at large. So by doing stratification, you can get towards certain kinds of cognitive phenotypes. And you can start to map what the population-based cognitive marker process might be. I call this Mark 1 because there's bound to be failures of replications, and other people say, you don't know what you're doing and it'll be like this and so on. So it seems to me that the striking feature is that there are mnemonic deficits in individuals who are double hit with child maltreatment and some kind of genetic risk that modulates behaviour. I remember being very influenced by an article Trevor gave me, and I think the first author was Molly Crockett, who might be talking later. Impaired consolidation of experience seems to be pretty clear-cut. And there's a lot of, I won't bore you with the anecdotes and clinical details, but child maltreated individuals, and I don't mean terribly physically abused, but even master, are very poor in recall for a wide variety of events. It struck me that there's a preference for prior beliefs over updating with new information, and they're very, very stuck when you see new cues like neutrality. You're struggling to decide what you do with this. I'm not quite sure what the right word would be. It's a confidence issue, maybe a competence issue. It's not simply about emotion processing prior to the illness. Impaired decision-making when challenged seems to be pretty evident, but we don't understand enough of the aggregations, and there's not much doubt from the probabilistic reversal task, but I don't know how important it is, that there are real difficulties in learning at least new social information. And then under here, you can sort of describe some of the streams of pathophysiology that might be, of physiology that might be related to that. And I'm up too, so that's perfect, isn't it? I want to thank the funders and again to my colleagues.